Welcome in to another edition of the Blitz. I am your host, Michael Barnaud, and today I want to talk for a little bit about this NFL draft upcoming, and in particular, I want to address some of these criticisms I'm hearing about Joe Burrow, particularly from Colin Cowherd saying some stuff that, quite frankly, just doesn't make sense. The biggest thing that he said I'd like to address in this podcast is that he said that this past year's LSU team was one of the most loaded, was just absolutely loaded. Well, with any national championship team, you're going to have talent. But I would not regard LSU as so loaded outside the quarterback that you could have plugged, just about anyone in there and it would have worked. I don't agree with that assessment. And I'll prove it right here. So first, let's start with the defense. By LSU standards historically, this defense was actually one of the worst ones they fielded in the last 10 years. They gave up 22 points per game this past season. 22 points per game. By defensive coordinator measures, that is about average. And at a school like LSU, it's below average. For most of the last 10 years, they have given up fewer than 20 points per game. They've given up fewer than 20 points per game in the last 10 years, most of the time. This was actually tied for second, the second worst defense they fielded in the last 10 years by the numbers. And you look at the defense, it wasn't loaded with superstar talent. You had Delpit at safety, Chase on at outside linebacker, and that's really all that comes to mind on that defense. So you look at them from a defensive standpoint, actually a below average LSU team. So you're not loaded there. You're not getting the best defense. Of the college football playoff, the only defense they were better than was Oklahoma's. And outside of Oklahoma, again, they were a clear notch below Clemson and Ohio State. And then you look on offense, yes, the receivers were very good. Yes, you had Thaddeus Moss. But receiver talent is not new to LSU either. They've always had great receivers in Baton Rouge. The problem has always been that they don't have the quarterback to get them the ball. Ever since Zach Mettenberger, they've never had a quarterback that could distribute the ball on any level. He's the only LSU quarterback I can think of that was actually good and performed well in college was Mettenberger. But they've had receiver talent for years. People often forget Odell Beckham came out of LSU. So, by historical standards, not a great defense. The receiving core was good, but that's not new. Offensive line was very good. That's true also. You look at the running back. He's not a superstar. He's a good player, but he's not a superstar. LSU has had much better in recent years. They had Leonard Fournette, Darius Geis. LSU has had great running backs for years. Offensive talent-wise, LSU has been up there in the country. They have produced great athletes who've gone on to the NFL and done well at the next level. LSU has not struggled for offensive talent. The only thing that made this year's LSU team special was Joe Burrow and his ability in this offense. But then we get into the debate of, well, who was worth more to who? Was it Joe Brady's offense or was it Joe Burrow's arm and play? I think it was a mixture of both, but only time's going to tell on just who needed who more. That will be an interesting storyline to follow. But even if you watch the film, there's a lot of these plays that's just a great throw. It's just a perfect throw into a tight window, and he had to make the throw. You see him all the time extend plays, scramble out of trouble. That's another thing about Burrow is where did he get the wheels in this offseason? I think back to a year ago, he was a statue. And now all of a sudden he's running around and he's outrunning great athletes. So I don't know what he did in the offseason, but quite a few people need to start doing it. But I watched Joe Burrow play, and a lot of these plays, that's Joe Burrow. That's got to be a perfect throw. Yes, the offense was good, but these plays, these throws, most of them, That's just a great throw. It takes a great quarterback to go do that. And you look at his championship games, he outperformed every guy that he played against. This is one reason why he's the clear number one, and the Bengals have to take him. They've got to take him number one. I saw recently, I think it was David Carr put on Twitter that, and he was watching Andy Dalton throw footballs into a net, and by that rationale, he was saying, yeah, Cincinnati's good at quarterback. They should draft Chase Young. So one homemade backyard video where he's throwing into a net with nobody pressuring him is enough to just forget about years of film we have and a proven record that he has as a starter in the NFL. We're supposed to forget all that because we saw some homemade video in the backyard. Okay. I guess. That's your prerogative. But he has to be drafted number one. The Bengals have to go with Joe Burrow. No, I want to shift to Tua Tagovailoa. Why do we not have that discussion? Why has Tua, quite frankly, not been in the conversation for a while now as the number one? And this is another thing that Colin Cowherd he's picked out his dog. He's got a dog in this fight, and he's going to roll with him no matter what. That's another aspect of this. He said Tua Tagovailoa is great. Joe Burrow, a one-hit wonder, played on a loaded team. He's coming up with all the excuses. But the fact is, when they went head-to-head, Burrow played well that whole game. And Tua did not. It took him a long time to get going. And by the time he did get going, it was too late because Burrow and the offense were that good. And it wasn't the run game. This team was carried by Joe Burrow's arm. Carried by him. A below-average defense, a running back that was not amazing, a run game that you can't just turn around and hand this ball off if you get in trouble. It's Joe and the offense better light up the scoreboard every week or we're going to lose. Now, why is Tua not a number one pick? I'm going to start with my criticisms of Tua, and I'll end with my overall assessment of him. Joe Burrow's number one. There's no question. If he fails in the NFL, I will be absolutely shocked. And believe me, I have completely given up on free agency, by the way. A quick note on this. Free agency, I have given up thinking I know who's going to go where. As a football student of the game, I mean, like the business side of football is something I've never had a great grasp of. I'm just going to say it. You know, like if it's not something that I do. I don't sit around figuring out the business aspects of the game. I can figure out who needs what. And based on that, I can say, well, that guy should go here, this guy should go there. But no one knows who's going to go anywhere. And I'll leave that stuff to guys like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and Jay Glazer with Fox. I'll leave that stuff to those guys. They're the ones who break that stuff. They're the ones who talk business. That's not my thing. I talk about the game, and I analyze the game, and I have my opinions based on what I saw, based on what I've seen, and my knowledge of the game. That is what I go off of. And the film is absolutely clear on Joe Burrow. He is the clear number one after this last season. Now, why is Tua not in that discussion? The first reason, and everyone talks about the injuries. The injuries are obviously a big deal, but that actually isn't my biggest concern. Or at least it wasn't. And if you're going to say injuries, he was never healthy the whole time, well, then that's a knock right there. I would say, when are you ever healthy? But let's ignore all that, because even if you're not 100%, you still have to get the job done. And if you look at the history of Tua's career, he has failed to get the job done in the big game numerous times. His first year, he goes in against Georgia at the half, and he goes on to win them the game. But I'd like to point out that Georgia at the time did not know him. They didn't prepare for him. He was an unknown. They didn't know how big his arm was. They didn't know that he could make those throws. And so he was able to go in and win that game against Georgia. But then you look at the rest of his games when he went against even comparable competition. The SEC championship game against Georgia in 2018. A game that if Jalen Hurts hadn't come in, I firmly believe they go on to lose that game. But Jalen Hurts comes in, he gets injured, surprise, surprise, has to leave the game, and Jalen Hurts comes in. Again, Georgia had not schemed for him. The game plan was for Tua, not Jalen Hurts. Brings a different skill set in, and he goes on to win Alabama the game. But Tua can't take credit for that. He wasn't in the whole time, and if he had remained in, I firmly believe they lose that game. Then you go on to the next one. You go to Oklahoma. Oklahoma that season had the worst defense I've ever seen for a playoff caliber football team. The worst defense historically I've ever seen. Absolutely pitiful. And yeah, he does well. They score 45 points. Good for that. Again, not a hard thing to do against that team. That doesn't prove anything to me. Then we go to the national championship. He plays against Clemson. Gets completely lit up. Alabama, the game was well over by the third quarter. You head into the next season. The only high-profile matchup that he was a part of was the duel he had with Burrow that he convincingly lost. He made mistakes in that game. He made key mistakes. Burrow did not. He had the home field. He had the better coach. And he couldn't get it done. Again, more reason why. More reason why Tua's not ahead of Burrow and should not be. Another reason why I think it's hard to evaluate Tagovailoa is because the receiving core he was throwing to is incredible. There are two bona fide first-round picks in there, Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, and at least one and possibly more. And then Waddle, who's the punt returner as well, another great receiver. He'll probably be a second-round pick. And that's what he threw to for 2 years in the SEC. And against the best offensive line in football, and he's never struggled for offensive talent at the running back position either. So this is why it's incredibly hard to evaluate talent at Alabama in the offensive skill players. The receivers operate independent of everyone else. That's why the receivers have done well at the next level from Alabama, regardless, because your talent can carry you as a receiver. But as a running back and a quarterback, those positions are always hard to evaluate from Alabama because for running backs, the offensive line is always the best in the country. Or if it's not, it's very close. And for the quarterbacks, you throw to the best receivers, you have the best offensive line protecting you. So I just have the question. What happens to Tua when he suddenly doesn't have the best receivers to throw to? And he doesn't have the best offensive line in front of him. I've heard some people compare him to Russell Wilson. Those comparisons have mostly stopped, I think, because people have watched the film more closely and they realize he's actually not great at extending the play and ad-libbing, which you would think, since you're comparing him to Russell Wilson. He actually plays, and this comparison is correct, he plays a lot more like Drew Brees. He's a very on-time quarterback. I think he's got a stronger arm than Brees does, but he's very on-time. He's a timing quarterback, which is actually a good thing for the NFL. And especially if he can't extend the play. And if you look at when Tua has gotten hurt, it's when he does try to extend the play. So he's not great at the improv thing. He does, he escapes the pocket and then he takes hits, which you can't do. If you're going to improv, you have to be like Russell or Kyler Murray, that they escape the pocket, but they don't get hit when they run. They slide. They get out of bounds. They don't take hits when they move the pocket, when they run. But it takes a special quarterback to do that. And that's why Tua does not belong in that category. Now, that being said, I like Tua as a person. Again, I like his intangibles, much like Dak. I'm a fan of him personally. He's humble. He comes across as mature. So there's a lot I like about Tua in that regard. I actually like him more as a person than I do Burrow. I want everyone who's listening to this to know that. With the Joe Burrow praise, I was late to the party. I did not want Burrow to succeed after I watched him because he comes across to me as kind of cocky. He comes across as really full of himself, and I didn't like that. And again, I was hesitant and reluctant to buy him and this LSU football team. But the reality is, you can't deny what he's done. And what he's done is he just had the greatest season by a college quarterback in history. And he's done it at a school that is not a traditional offensive firepower. He has done that. So there can't be any more denial on that front. I think Burrow's going to go number 1. Tua has to go top 10. There's a very good chance he goes top 5, but I see no way that Tua gets outside the top 10. Because even with all the criticisms I have of him, his talent is too good. He's too promising of a prospect to pass up if you're one of these quarterback needy teams, such as the Chargers, potentially Jacksonville. But it appears with Jacksonville, they're going with Gardner Minshew, but that doesn't strike me as something they're sold on. They're just saying, well, it's the best option we have right now. There's reports that the Chargers are going to go with Herbert instead of Tua, and that I don't agree with, because Herbert, to me, as much as I have complaints about Tua and I have my criticisms, I have far more about Herbert, because there have been a lot of games in Herbert's career he just flat disappeared. And I'm not sold on him at all. In big games, he also is a guy who did not show me a lot in a lot of his big games. Again, a guy has to be more consistent than this if I'm going to pick him top 5. So that's the reality. Joe Burrow will be the number 1 pick. If the Bengals go with anyone else, it's foolish. So that is my quick hit for the day. Joe Burrow is the real deal. Don't listen to the guys like Colin Cowherd who are trying to bag on him, and they're trying to and will insult him for 7 minutes and then go, well, I'm actually defending him. No, actually you're not. You picked a dog in the fight. You have a narrative you want to fit, and your assignment is you need to make the guy who just had the best season in college football history look like he's not the real deal. I say good luck. I think Joe Burrow is as sure a thing of a franchise quarterback as we're going to come across for a while here. I think Trevor Lawrence has the same potential next year. But again, Burrow went up against Trevor Lawrence and outdueled him against a pretty good Clemson defense. Not a perfect one, but a pretty good one. Anyway, that'll do it for this edition of The Blitz. I've been your host, Michael Barnaud. If you like the video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell if you want to be notified whenever I release new content. I hope you're all staying safe in this coronavirus. It looks like it's starting to ease up a little bit. Maybe we'll have sports back without fans by May. There's been talk of that. So I really hope that we can have this all settled by that time. I'm hopeful that we'll have summer sports, and I'm very optimistic we'll have football in the fall with fans. So hope you're all staying safe. Have yourselves a good one, and we will talk to you again soon.